Welcome. I'm Dr. Jeff Borenstein. Everyone is touched by psychiatric conditions, either themselves or a loved one. Do not suffer in silence. With help, there is hope. Today, on Healthy Minds, we continue our conversation with Patrick Kennedy.
I had the blessing of having a chance to serve with my father, and we actually got to negotiate, of all things, the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act. So here I was saying, Dad, you need to include alcoholism and depression in this bill. You can't make this stuff up.
That's today on Healthy Minds. Healthy Minds is brought to you in part by the American Psychiatric Association Foundation, the Graham Beck Foundation, the New York State Psychiatric Association, and the New York State Office of Mental Health. Welcome to Healthy Minds. I'm Dr. Jeff Borenstein. Today we continue our conversation with Patrick Kennedy as he shares his own experiences living with bipolar disorder and addiction, and his personal journey toward recovery. You share intimate details about your relationship with your dad. And I found very striking when you spoke about how you had longed for more emotional intimacy with your father. And it was only till way too late that you realized that the lunches and the gossiping about politics was that intimacy. And many people don't realize it while they're living it, that they actually are having intimacy with their parents or other loved ones. And I'd like you to speak about that.
Well, I was blessed because, my dad was the single most important figure in my life. Emotionally, while he was kind of debilitated in some respects because of his post-traumatic stress and the self-medicating that came with that, he was more present for me than my mom was, who was absolutely debilitated because of her alcoholism. My real relationship with my father was marred because I was in a constant struggle to try to get his attention and his affection. I depended on it. I lived for it. And of course, I was probably over-reliant on it, and even as an adolescent growing into a young adult, I never really grappled with coming into my own. I was so fixated on his attention and love. I write about in the book that I often felt like I didn't get what I needed, which I think is pretty common amongst sons looking for approval from their fathers. And I also talked about later, having looked back when my dad passed away into the relationship that I had with him, that I undervalued those things that I took for granted with us, which was a relationship that was fantastic. It was just at the time I never appreciated it for what it was. I wanted a real conversation where we talked about real intimate things. But in fact, for his generation, he did the best he could in communicating in the way that he could. And that was in the kind of common kind of banters and lunches where we talked shop about being in Congress and what was going on in the House. I had the blessing of having a chance to serve with my father. Not only was he this towering figure as a U.S. Senator and a national political figure, but he was also my colleague in Congress. I got to actually work with him, and we actually got to negotiate, of all things, the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act. So here I was saying, Dad, you need to include alcoholism and depression in this bill. And he's like, well, I think we can only pass a bill that includes severe and persistent mental illness. There's a lot of people who say if we add addiction and alcoholism, we may kill the bill because no one wants to support that. And I'm like, Dad, we gotta include it. And look at what we did. We got both in there. And my dad, who never liked talking about these things, about alcoholism and addiction, especially with me, because I was really public with mine, that he supported my bill. And We passed it because of his help. And I got to be in the White House with my father, who was the one that said all he needs to have is a good swift kick in the ass. And here we were watching the President of the United States sign the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act on the same desk that my uncle spoke about civil rights, in the same desk that my uncle signed the Community Mental Health Act of 1963. You can't make this stuff up. And so I look back with enormous gratitude for the relationship that I had with my dad. But I write about the fact that I couldn't appreciate it at the time as much as I do today.
You also share a very moving experience where after your dad passed away, he had written a letter just in case, God forbid, he was assassinated when he was running for president. And I'd like you to share with us what that was like for you to receive that letter.
Well, I think I denied, stuffed the fact that in my house, we had bulletproof vests and, a constant threat of people, trying to kill my dad like they killed my uncles. And, for one, I don't think I ever appreciated what it was like for him. And after he died, I got this letter that his former chief of staff shared with me that he wrote to both my siblings and to me that, in the event that he was killed. And the notion that he had to write that letter because it was a reality that I had to deal with is pretty shocking. So anyway, I just...
It shows what he lived with day in and day out and what you also lived with as a youngster.
Yeah, I think that this issue of trauma is just so underappreciated in our society. Imagine all these kids growing up in inner cities, where they watch one parent, beat up another, or they hear gunfire on a daily basis, or they see their friends murdered. It's hard to imagine those kids ever being able to get their mental health right and be able to overcome that obstacle to, their emotional life in a way that allowed them to succeed in life, both in their schooling and in their overall life. And it's so amazing that in this society, we do nothing to evaluate where a child is coming from and try to intervene earlier in life when those children have experienced the kind of violence and trauma that so many of them have had to experience.
You also speak about your father at the Democratic Convention, one of your favorite quotes of your dad.
Well, my dad said in the 1980 convention when he conceded his defeat to Jimmy Carter in the 1980 Democratic primary, that the work goes on, the cause endures, and the dream shall never die. And I love that quote because it's about what my dad was really all about, and that was to continue and persevere. And in football analogy, it would be like 3 yards in a cloud of dust. You need enough to get the first down, and then you make the next push down the field. You don't rely on the Hail Mary pass to win the game. You struggle and you persist, and ultimately you win because you get back up again and you push forward. That is a terrific lesson. It's a terrific concept in life. We try to get the quick win, the quick fix, and as a society, that's how we're oriented. When I think the lesson in life is to get into the long haul and to just grind it out. And that's what that quote means to me.
You're now a father, And I'd like you to speak about what it's like for you now to be raising your children.
Well, I am so blessed. I have an incredible partner in life, my wife Amy, and we have beautiful, healthy children, and I thank God for that every day. So I'm blessed. I have a beautiful family. They are giving me a whole new perspective on life, because it is true. You are transformed through your family. It's just a fantastic blessing to have that as my reason for living today.
You speak very eloquently in the book about your relationship with Amy and about how important she is to you, and the issue of how love and faith are so important as a component of treatment and health. And I'd like you to speak about that.
So I'm in 12-step recovery, and I think it's an enormously useful and powerful way to orient yourself in your life, because the principles of those 12 steps are so powerful for living a life of meaning and purpose. And to have a spouse who fully supports me, taking the time to really embrace the 12-step program, which itself takes a lot of time, really is something I'm grateful for. Because, a lot of spouses, because I'm in 12-step programs where, my colleagues who are also my peers just don't have that support from their family. I mean, it makes it much more difficult for them to live fully in recovery, because their spouses just don't get it, that they need to go to meetings in order for them to stay healthy and well. And I'm fortunate because my wife gets it. She also attends Al-Anon as a way of supporting my own 12-step recovery. So I am very, very fortunate that my recovery has the added benefit of having my wife being part of my recovery, and that makes our relationship so much more meaningful, and it allows us to be better parents to our children, because my ultimate goal is to have my children grow up and, one, not ever see me under the influence of drugs and alcohol, but two, have me emotionally present in their lives so that they can achieve their maximum potential, because I will have laid a strong emotional foundation for them in their lives and given them all the backup that they need. We as a nation would think nothing of giving our soldiers every form of protection and armament and allow them to go into the field of battle with everything that they need. I want to do that for my children. But metaphorically, I want it to be love and physical embrace and reinforcement and being present for them. I want that to be what sustains them in the stressful lives that they're going to go and have to compete within. Because everybody needs a strong, force behind them in order to succeed in life.
One of the things that you spoke about is the importance of exercise. I know you like to swim. Tell me a little bit about how exercise fits into your recovery.
Well, we need to treat the body, mind, and spirit, and the body is a crucial component to living a mentally healthy life, because your brain, if it's, being filled with these endorphins, that is why you exercise. At least I exercise for my brain more than for any other organ in the body. So my wife likes the way I look now, because I'm a little bit, thinner and more pleasing to the eye for her. But we both agree that it's all about our brains. My brain works a lot better. It copes with stress a lot better if I've exercised. So I swim and I run and use small weights.
Any other lifestyle steps that you take in terms of sleep, diet, other aspects of lifestyle that are helpful to you?
Well, not only does exercising help, but of course, making sure that I don't watch TV late at night. I get some sleep. I mean, sleep is crucial. Absolutely. I mean, just draw the line. I must go to sleep at a certain hour, or else it doesn't work. The next day just doesn't work as well. I must exercise if I want maximum potential in that day. I must eat healthy. And while I'm busy and on the road, I'll probably have too much caffeine intake. But when I'm home and I'm not running around, I really try to manage my diet in a way that's a healthier diet.
You also speak about the importance to you of having downtime, time for yourself, for your family, to sort of step back and regenerate.
Well, for me, the single greatest source of recovery for me is helping my fellows in recovery. I mean, that is what makes me a more valuable husband to my wife, someone who is setting a greater model and standard for my children. It's what gives me purpose and meaning in my life, to help others who are struggling from mental illness and addiction. There is nothing that's more important in my life. It just sustains me, it guides me, it gives me purpose. And serving others is absolutely the ticket to a contented, useful life. It takes you out of your own challenges, allows you to help meet other people's challenges, and it's liberation. And I cannot emphasize enough that service towards others is the objective of life.
Patrick, one of your accomplishments is to have helped write and pass the parity law. And it's a battle that you continue to fight, to have it implemented appropriately.
Well, the parity law says if you have a mental illness and addiction, whether you're inpatient in-network or outpatient in-network or inpatient out-of-network or outpatient out-of-network, or you need emergency room benefits or pharmacy benefits, that you must receive reimbursement for those treatments, the same treatments, primary care, secondary care, tertiary levels of care, that you would receive if you had cancer, diabetes, cardiovascular disease. We eliminated higher copays, deductibles, premiums, and lower lifetime caps. But what we haven't been able to do is get the medical utilization review, which is the insidious aspect of denying care that insurance companies still employ to keep you and your loved one from getting the care they need. We need to enforce the parity law. The White House has been negligent. Sylvia Burwell, who's Secretary of HHS, has not fulfilled her responsibility under the law. She should exercise her authority that we gave her under the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, and demand insurance companies reveal how they employ utilization management in the treatment of a behavioral health patient when compared to a medical or surgical patient. Now, this seems like inside ball, and you know what? Insurance companies and others are counting on us not knowing what we're doing.
For people who live with this, it's not inside ball because they get denied treatment all the time.
They get denied, and I'm telling you why they get denied treatment. Because insurance companies hide behind, well, this is proprietary. The way we do medical utilization review is proprietary. Not when it's my life. And when are we going to get, and by the way, Schneiderman has been fantastic. He set a model in New York for the rest of the country. We need more attorneys general to fight for parity like your Attorney General Schneiderman has. And frankly, New York is not the only place where people are being denied care. If you've seen numbers of settlements here in New York, well, why is New York the only state where people are getting denied care? All that it means is no other attorney general in this country is doing what Schneiderman's doing. So, I really have great praise for your Attorney General.
One of the challenges that families often face, especially parents of adult children, is due to the privacy components of the HIPAA law. They may have difficulty interacting with the psychiatrist or other caregiver, and I'd like you to speak about those challenges.
Yeah. The Congress needs to reform 42 CFR. Historically, it was okay for us to have privacy for mental health and addiction records. But today, those of us who are in recovery from addiction and mental illness, need to have the same access to coordinated care that our friends with diabetes and cancer and cardiovascular disease have. If we keep our medical records separate, meaning I go to my primary care doc and I complain of back pain, and that doctor doesn't know that I have a history of opiate addiction, and he writes me a prescription for OxyContin, he might as well be signing my death warrant because he doesn't understand the fatal nature of making that prescription available to me because he doesn't have access to my full medical history. That has to change. We have gamed the system, which means if you're in recovery, you just go shopping for doctors that will write you the prescriptions you want. And doctors have no clue when they're writing these prescriptions that the person they're writing for has a history of mental illness and addiction. Furthermore, you could be unconscious and going into the ER after a traumatic brain injury or something like that, and they could load you up with medications not knowing that you're on a bunch of powerful antipsychotics or anticonvulsants or antidepressants medication. That would be fatal to us. It is absolutely, part of stigma that we are not coordinating care for the brain with the rest of the body. We need a full medical record. That means we need to reform 42 CFR. We need to allow family members to be part of our recovery like they would be if we just got out of surgery for any other physical illness. Our family would be like, well, what do I need to do? Well, you need to care for them here are your bandages, you need to attend to them this, call me if they need help. But if you're a mental illness patient, guess what? No family involvement, don't bother calling, we don't know what we can do to help. This has got to all change. And I hope people write their members of Congress and demand that this changes, because people with mental illness and addiction are not being treated fairly, and that needs to change.
In your book, you speak about diagnosis and the DSM. And when the Consumer's Guidebook to DSM came out, you wrote the foreword to that book. I'd like you to speak about that.
Well, the real benefit that we have from modern medicine is we're understanding that the organ of the brain is biochemical and that the symptoms of that biochemistry are behavioral. We now can appreciate the medical aspects of a disease that's been defined in moral terms. That people suffering from these illnesses have been ascribed character flaws when in fact they have chemistry issues. And the benefit of the time that we're living in, and certainly the future, is that we can eschew that kind of stigma and discrimination, which is based upon the ignorance of the fact that the brain is part of the body, and that we need to treat the brain health in the same way we would treat any other organ of the body. And that's the exciting thing about having the DSM, and it's the exciting thing about what neuroscience is doing for us today in revealing how the brain works and how it affects behavior.
Patrick, you certainly have embodied that, both in terms of sharing your own personal experiences, the advocacy that you've done both in Congress and subsequently. You certainly have provided service to individuals and to society on a whole. And I want to thank you for what you've done, what you continue to do and will do in the future, and thank you for joining us here today.
You bet. Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks. Patrick's book, A Common Struggle, and his advocacy for mental health emphasizes the point that all of us, at times in our life, will face mental illness or addiction, either our own illness or the illness of a family member. The common struggle is silence, secrecy, and shame. His message is, do not suffer in silence. With help, there is hope. Until next time, I'm Dr. Jeff Borenstein. Goodbye. With help, there is hope. Healthy Minds is brought to you in part by the American Psychiatric Association Foundation, the Graham Beck Foundation, the New York State Psychiatric Association, and the New York State Office of Mental Health.